no conversation about thought life from a faith perspective would be complete without bringing in 2 Corinthians 10. It's that verse that says, take every thought captive. Y'all know that one? The full verse is, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Now, I remember coming across that verse when I was reading the Bible, and I loved it because it was very action oriented and very, I had this like feel of conquest. I'm going to take my thoughts captive and I'm going to make them subjugate them to the lordship of Christ, right? That was kind of how I was thinking. And as a high schooler who was wrestling with all sorts of thoughts that were swirling through my mind, right? Thoughts about my future, thoughts about academics, thoughts about girls, lustful thoughts, and thoughts about my identity. I really took this seriously. And yet I don't know how successful I was trying to live this out. And so I would love to hear your perspective. Both of you are Christians, but as mental health practitioners, how would you, because a lot of people hear this verse, I want to take every thought captive, but how would you nuance that from a mental health perspective? And I know we already have been. We've been talking about some things, but let's integrate that a little more.
And to connect to what we were saying earlier, part of the challenge is just to notice that there's more going on than just a brain having one thought every 15 seconds, right? We're not just brains that are just thinking thoughts. We're experiencing the world. We have emotional experiences. Our body is experiencing things. I mean, sometimes I think crazy thoughts and then I go and have a good sleep and I feel a lot, I stop thinking those thoughts the next day. Or, I have a good meal and I feel better. I'm not thinking the same way. So we're beings that are created, mind, body, soul, emotions. And so that's important to think about. I think that there is something to be said for we are not our thoughts, which Laura mentioned earlier. And I think there are ways that we can train ourselves. We can go into training, not just physical training, but mental and emotional training, which we've talked about before, mindful practices where we practice being with ourselves and letting thoughts come up, letting feelings come up, and then letting them go and coming back to breathing, to meditating on something that is good and true. And I think that is a really important practice so that you can have a thought and not automatically equate that with that's true and that's true about me and that's true about the world and I'm going to freak out or I'm going to go do this in response. To be able to have a relationship with your thoughts where you're able to weigh that a little bit more and you're able to discern. And I think, one image that I think might be helpful is that image you talked about. I forgot exactly how you said it, John.
The birds?
The birds, but the idea of I've got these thoughts and there is a sense in which I want to submit those thoughts to God. And I think there's a way of even imaging that for those people that are more visually and use their imagination is the idea of almost picturing the cross and kind of laying your thoughts, at the cross and letting that be a lens through which your thoughts are shaped so that you can if you think of that as your highest value, if you're seeing the world through the lens of a life that's transformed by the cross, by Christ, to submit your thoughts in that way to him, I think that can be really big. I think that's more of a meditative practice still, and maybe it's harder to do on the go in the fly, but I think that's something that people can think about is how do I create distance by practicing mindfulness, meditation, prayer, where thoughts come up, but I don't allow myself to return to the practice. And then when I am noticing my thoughts, how can I submit those to what I value the most and test it and see where it stands?
Yeah. And I think it's interesting when I heard you talking about it, John, about how you related to the almost the aggressiveness of that practice, right? I'm going to take it captive and I'm going to subdue it and I'm going to be in control of it. When really we have very little control. We have actually probably zero control about the thoughts that actually come into our minds because we're not really, you're not consciously, sometimes I'm going to think about this, but most of the time they just come. They're like just, one of the therapists I work with here talks about like ducks on a pond just floating in front of you, and you can't control the ducks. They're going where they want to go, but they're just going to come in front of you, and you may not like that one. But if you think about your thoughts as something that is not you, that is a really important concept. And then I get to choose. I think if you think of taking it captive, like I get to choose whether I'm going to bring this one in and make it part of me, or I'm going to release this one to go float away. Okay. Now, which of these ducks am I going to take home with me? Right? Do I want to take the duck home with me that says I'm a bad person because of XYZ? I might need to have some reflection on that. But a lot of times when they're coming from that convicting type of point of view, I would say, okay, I may not want to take that duck home, but maybe I want to take a duck that's a little bit different, that I rephrase a little bit and think about it in a little bit different way and make sure that it's grounded in truth. Is this thought grounded in truth? Does it align with my core values of who I am? Does it align with who I believe God wants me to be? And if I can get there, then I'm saying, okay, I'm going to take this one home. Right? But again, like Paul said, that takes time. And a lot of times, and believe me, I do not do this perfectly either. I mean, sometimes I'll find myself ruminating on a thought for days and days before I finally go, wait a second, why is this one sticking with me so hard?
Yeah.
Right? And giving yourself the time when you notice it to say, what is going on with this one? Why do I want to take this one home? And is this one I really should just release? Or do I need to reframe it somehow so that it actually does align with me and fits better?
That's good. That's really good. So, I mean, just to make it crystal clear, because I think it's so helpful, what we are saying here is our thoughts do matter. They are very important. They are part of who we are. And you are not your thoughts. There is a distinction, a very important distinction. So thoughts may come and go like the rubber duckies, but there's always a critical choice that we make about what we do with that thought. And so when we grab onto that thought and bring it in, I like that imagery of like, bringing it in or treasuring it. That's a choice that we can make. And so whether that's, that, oh, my boss, my spouse, that initial thought, that happens. But when we begin to make a checklist of all the ways they've wronged us, now that's a choice that we've made to bring it in, right? And so that's the critical distinction. And Paul, I love that imagery too of, okay, I have this thought and I want to release it. I want to bring that before Christ because I know that's not something that I want to hold to myself, or I'm not even sure. And I want to bring that before God and allow him to help me get curious about what might be there.